Chin-Rua chuckled, came to the pool and jumped in directly. After receiving it, she quickly swam to Xia Feishuan. "It's the landlord, is it the landlord?" Xia Feishuan asked quickly. "It's me," Chin-Rua said. Hearing the answer, Xia Feishuan hugged Chin-Rua tightly like an octopus. "Take me up, I'm afraid," Xia Feishuan whispered in the voice of a mosquito. If there was a light, you could see that the face of Miss Xia was already red. "Okay," Chin-Rua agreed very quickly, and not far away was the stairs to the shore, only 20 meters away from him. But it took Chin-Rua half an hour to complete this short distance. When they landed on the shore, the electricity suddenly came again. Xia Feishuan escaped from Chin-Rua's embrace like a rabbit, and was several meters away from him as if fleeing for her life. "Landlord, you are so shameless, you have walked such a distance for more than half an hour," Xia Feishuan said with contempt. "I can't see clearly in the water," Chin-Rua said. "Is it easy for me? I have walked back and forth a dozen times." "Hey, landlord, you actually have tattoos on your body. You are so handsome. Could it be that you are a gangster?" The curious baby Xia Feishuan came over again, and touched the wolf head pattern on Chin-Rua's chest with her small hands. "Well, people abroad prefer to have these tattoos, it's a fashion." "Oh, I'm going to sleep, good night." Xia Feishuan stepped on her slippers and walked quickly to the room. Chin-Rua laughed and sat on the ground in a daze for a while. A thought of protecting her rose in her heart before going upstairs. Go to bed. Early the next morning, the Yanlake restaurant opened early, and a few repeat customers came, all young and students from nearby schools. Seeing Chin-Rua, he immediately greeted him politely, "Boss Chin." "Haha, hello." Chin-Rua said hello while cooking, very busy. At 12 o'clock in the noon, the business of the restaurant finally came to its first peak. 20 or so guests were waiting in the front hall. If someone sees this appearance, they will definitely marvel at the good cooking skills. At this moment, there was a sound of smashing things outside, accompanied by the roars of several men. Chin-Rua poked his head curiously. At this time, Xia Feishuan also ran over, and said to Chin-Rua anxiously, "Landlord, a few people came outside and started fighting in our hotel." Chin-Rua wiped her hands and hurriedly said, "Take me to have a look." Not far away, several students were beaten to the point of bleeding, but they dared not resist at all. Outside the door is a group of colorful social men with dyed hair, headed by a tattooed man who is 1.8 meters tall. He wore a thick gold necklace around his neck, and he wore a pair of large patterned trousers with a blue shirt on top. "You fucking dare to yell at me, don't you want to mess around?" After the tattooed man finished speaking, he picked up a stool and threw it at a student on the ground. With a bang, the student was beaten to the point of bleeding, and hugged his head and curled up on the ground. The few students around dared not speak out, with angry expressions on their faces. These people are gangsters outside the school, and offending them will not end well. Seeing this scene, Chin-Rua immediately walked over and said, "Guys, stop hitting people, or I'll call the police." The tattooed man turned his head and saw a cook approaching, couldn't help but sneered a few times, and said with contemptuous eyes, "Do you fucking know who I am? Call the police station is my home." Hearing this arrogant voice, the faces of those students turned even paler. Xia Feishuan, who was standing beside Chin-Rua, clenched her teeth. The tattooed man accidentally saw Xia Feishuan, and his eyes instantly turned green. In the next second, he swallowed a mouthful of spit, and accosted, Beautiful, my name is Lu Daolong, can you leave a mobile phone number, tonight, hey, let's chat. My number is 110. With such a powerful landlord, Xia Feishuan is not afraid of this fat man. Damn it, dare to play with me, are you looking for death? The tattooed man was very angry, and after speaking, he wanted to catch Xia Feishuan, and his target was the towering chest. The landlord save me, Xia Feishuan shouted. Just as Xia Feishuan finished shouting, the tattooed man flew upside down and fell outside the door like a dead dog. Chin-Rua put his hands in his trouser pockets, looked contemptuously at the tattooed man who fell like a dog eating shit, and said indifferently, "Why bother, if you have something to talk about, why do you have to do it?" The audience was silent. No one thought that the cook in front of him was so perverted that he kicked the 1.8-meter tattooed man flying away with one kick. The tattooed man struggled to get up from the ground, his mouth was full of dust, he looked at Chin-Rua viciously, and shouted at the younger brothers around him, "Kill him to death. It's the boss." Several younger brothers rushed over aggressively, copying the bench, and the iron bar holding the iron bar. The audience suddenly became lively, and the guests sitting in the back did not dare to eat, and hid in a safe place to watch in fright. Seeing this scene, Chin-Roa suddenly showed a murderous look in his eyes. "I don't hate you people, there is a reason for existence. But you provoke me and beat my guests, this is something I cannot tolerate." After Chin-Roa finished speaking, she slammed her fist hard on a man's face. With a snap, the bridge of the man's nose broke instantly, and he lay on the ground bloody. Without even the sound of howling, he fell into a coma. "You actually bully my clerk, my tenant, she may be my future wife, this is intolerable." Chin-Roa raised her foot suddenly, turned into a straight battle axe, and hit a man hard on the cheek. The man's face seemed to be hit by an axe, and he spun around a dozen times on the spot, and finally fell straight on the ground and passed out. After a while, 5 or 6 younger brothers were all easily knocked down by Chin-Roa, and the whole process was extremely easy. Chin-Roa clapped her hands, bowed to the stunned guests behind her and said, "I'm really sorry for scaring you all. I promise that this will never happen next time. I'll cover the expenses of everyone present today." Hearing Chin-Roa's words, all the guests in the audience cheered excitedly. "It's too unbelievable today. A cook beating a gangster is like an adult bullying a primary school student. It's too domineering." Xia Feishuan tugged at Chin-Roa's shoulder, and whispered, "Landlord, you are awesome." Chin-Roa chuckled and said, "The landlord is great everywhere." The tattooed man standing outside the door was already stunned. Looking at the younger brother lying on the ground like a dead dog, he gasped, a chill down his spine instantly rushed from the soles of his feet to his head. But in the blink of an eye, he showed a slight sneer, and said to Chin-Roa, "Boy, I have called the police just now. You intentionally hurt someone, and I have already filmed it with my mobile phone. If you can fight again, go to the police station." Chin-Roa didn't bother to pay attention, and went to work in the back kitchen, but the tattooed man sneered and waited on the spot. "There is a policeman in the police station who is his cousin, and he is bringing people over now." Sure enough, 10 minutes later, 3 or 4 police cars arrived at the Yan Lake Hotel. The first to get out of the car was a female policewoman of stature. What was unusual was that she was not wearing a police officer's uniform. Her straight and slender thighs were restrained by black tights, showing a curve that made men speechless. The proud bust, under the black tights, made the man couldn't help but exclaim. Lin Yener was in a bad mood today. She was originally a criminal police officer because she made a mistake in the last case, and was pushed into the ranks of ordinary police by the hateful chief. Although his identity is still a criminal policeman, it is still very depressing to think about how a good criminal policeman is in charge of fighting. Today was her vacation, and when she saw a few police cars from the bureau suddenly on the road, the nosy Lin Yener stopped the car and followed. "Who reported the crime just now?" Lin Yener first showed her police badge as soon as she entered the restaurant. Behind her, 7 or 8 policemen came over, and the tattooed man hurriedly ran to one of the policemen and shouted, Cousin, you have to decide for me." "Lu Fei, what's going on?" Lin Yener, who was walking forward, turned to look at Lu Fei. Lu Fei, who was pestered by his male cousin with tattoos, smiled wryly and said, "Officer Lin, this kid is a cousin of mine." Lin Yener nodded, and looked at the few people lying on the ground like dead dogs. Her beautiful eyes suddenly turned cold, and the hands were really heavy. From the eyes of the criminal police, it can be seen at a glance that each of these people has disabilities of varying degrees. Even if they are cured, it will cost a lot of money. "Whoever hit you, come out," Lin Yener said to the many guests in the hotel. "It's a cook," a guest said. Soon, Chin-Roa, who was carrying a pot, walked over leisurely, and looked at the policeman in front of him curiously. Immediately her eyes widened, and she said, "Pretty policewoman." Lin Yener instinctively revealed a trace of displeasure, and said coldly, "Did you beat these people?" "That's right, they beat my customers and hindered my business," Chin-Roa said indifferently. "Now you are suspected of intentionally hurting someone, please come with us to the police station," Lin Yener said. Binhai Public Security Bureau, Interrogation Room. In the dimly lit room, Chin-Roa was handcuffed, and sitting opposite was a beautiful detective. A few tall and burly policemen stood behind, looking at Chin-Roa with cold eyes from time to time. "Why do you want to beat someone?" the beautiful detective Lin Yener asked. They wantonly beat my customers in my shop, and tried to take advantage of my employees. Qin Rua said lightly. Why didn't you call the police? Lin Yenner asked with a hint of displeasure in her beautiful eyes. Qin Rua smiled and said, I don't like to rely on others, including the police. His words were full of pretentiousness, and the male policeman behind immediately said, Boy, this is the police station, you have to pretend to be outside. Lin Yenner glanced at Qin Rua in surprise. The prisoner in front of her was so calm, as if she was interrogating herself. Shaking off the strange illusion in her mind, Lin Yenner said, Name? Qin Rua. Nationality? Chinese. Gender? As a person who loves flowers and sees flowers in the workshop, the car has a flat tire, the universe is invincible and super handsome, beauty, I have doubts about your eyes. Qin Rua said a long paragraph. This is the police station, please be serious. Lin Yenner didn't buy it at all, acting like she was doing business. Gender? Male. Age? 25, I'll be 26 in 2 months. Beauty, are you coming to my birthday party? Qin Rua showed his humorous side again. Please be serious. Lin Yenner stood up straight away and knocked on the table vigorously. The policemen behind were already staring at Qin Rua with murderous eyes. At this moment, a man suddenly came from the interrogation room. Lin Yenner asked, Have you found his information? Return to police officer Lin, his information is blank, and the police system can't investigate this person at all. The man said strangely. What? Not only was Lin Yenner shocked, but even the male police officers beside her were in disbelief. Only Qin Rua, who was sitting on the chair, raised a faint smile. It would be strange if these little policemen had the right to investigate their own information. What are you laughing at? Lin Yenner looked at Qin Rua and found that he was smiling, so she couldn't help but get angry. Handling an ordinary case by myself unexpectedly failed to investigate the suspect's information. It's really horrible. I just think it's funny. By the way, my restaurant is still open, and the guests are still waiting to eat from me. I will compensate for the beating. I don't have time to play with you now. After Qin Rua finished speaking, she suddenly stood up. Seeing this scene, all the policemen in the interrogation room became tense, and the atmosphere suddenly became depressed. Accompanied by the dim interrogation room, there was a sense of tension. Lin Yenner directly pulled out her pistol and pointed it at Qin Rua's head. As a Chinese citizen, you have been detained by the criminal police station on suspicion of intentionally hurting people, and the forensic doctor has certified that those people you hurt have disabilities to varying degrees. You have been criminally detained. If you dare to resist, if not, the consequence will be imprisonment. You have to think about it carefully. Lin Yenner said coldly. Qin Rua smiled. Instead of looking at the pistol, she stared at Lin Yenner's beautiful eyes, and said, Who is your chief? Boy, you are really annoying. A policeman came over and punched Qin Rua in the face. He wanted to teach this ignorant kid a lesson. Qin Rua sneered, fixed her eyes on the policeman, and suddenly shot out a terrifying murderous look in her eyes. This gaze pierced through all the beliefs of the policeman in an instant, and the raised hand dared not drop it. Our director's name is Zhang Taijun. Lin Yenner frowned, but said it anyway. Qin Rua smiled lightly and said, Call your bureau chief. Who do you think you are? A male policeman said coldly. Lin Yenner felt that this matter was not simple. This man was too calm, but revealed a sense of domineering all over his body. The police station seemed to be nothing in his eyes, and he didn't even feel a little bit about pointing a gun at his head. In addition to the fact that the previous information was blank, Lin Yenner seemed to have already guessed the origin of this man. Special forces without a number? Go and notify the chief. Lin Yenner said. She knew that this matter could be big or small, and it was better for the chief to decide. It's Officer Lin. After a while, a pot-bellied bureau chief walked quickly, and several policemen greeted him respectfully. Zhang Taijun was a little impatient, looked at Lin Yenner, and asked, Xiao Lin, what's going on? Return to the chief. The police internal system can't find this person's information, and he specified that he wants to see you. Lin Yenner said solemnly. Zhang Taijun looked at Qin Rua in front of him, and smiled curiously. Oh, the police system can't find this person's information, which is interesting. Young man, I am Zhang Taijun, the director of the Binhai Public Security Bureau. What do you want from me? Qin Rua said. that Xiao Zhang, you are the director of the Binhai City Public Security Bureau? Xiao Zhang? Hearing this title, the tense atmosphere present was instantly dissipated, and all the policemen wanted to laugh, but did not dare to laugh, and forced themselves to hold back. The few policemen who saw Qin Ruo's displeasure had to admit that this kid was really good at pretending. Lin Yenner also stared at Qin Ruo with wide eyes. Is this guy pretending to be awesome or really awesome? He dared to call Xiao Zhang to a deputy bureau chief. Xiao Zhang, who was called, that is, Director Zhang Tiejuan's face was not so good looking, as if he could drip water. His eyes were astonishingly gloomy, and he said coldly, "Boy, it's not easy to be a rich second generation now. If you have anything to say, hurry up." Zhang Tiejuan's words were not alarmist. As the chief of a prefecture-level city's public security bureau, if Qin Ruo was really a little bit naive, he could definitely slap him to death. Qin Ruo shook her head with a smile and said, "You don't dare. By the way, I don't have time to chat with you. Call Luan over now." "You kid think you're the king of heaven? Damn, believe it or not, I shot you." "Wait, you said Luan, which Luan?" Zhang Taijun was very angry when he heard the first half of Qin Ruo's sentence, but the word Luan, but he had to stop his anger. "Hee, how many Luans are there in Binhai City?" Qin Ruo asked indifferently. However, Zhang Taijun felt a chilly feeling, and a tricky feeling slowly enveloped his body. People in Binhai City can count the number of hands that know Luan's name. Does this person really have a lot of background? "You mean Chairman Luan Lu?" Zhang Taijun asked tentatively. Qin Ruo nodded lightly. Zhang Taijun secretly took a deep breath. He already had the idea of releasing Qin Ruo. It is definitely not easy to know the name of the president of the Kyushu Association, and it is not something he can provoke. But the matter had reached this point, so he simply called Luan. 10 minutes later, a high-end black Mercedes-Benz drove up outside the police station, and an old man in a tunic suit strode in. In the interrogation room, Zhang Taijun led a group of policemen to greet him in person. "Hee, Mr. Lu, you are here." "Xiao Zhang, what do you need from me?" Luan asked curiously. This is the second time today that the policeman of the Public Security Bureau heard someone calling the director Xiao Zhang. From the previous disbelief to the present numbness. "Mr. Lu, there was a young man inside who was suspected of intentionally hurting someone and we caught him in. That kid actually knew your name and asked us to find you," Zhang Taijun said truthfully. "Come on, you've caused trouble." Luan instinctively felt that something was wrong, and after Zhang Taijun finished speaking, it suddenly magnified infinitely. Walking into the interrogation room quickly, a young man put his feet on the interrogation table, looking like a big boss. Seeing this scene, Zhang Taijun snorted coldly, "Presumptuous. Presumptuous." Zhang Taijun was dumbfounded, and saw Luan walking over with a smile on his old face. He bowed to Qin Ruo and said cheerfully, "Master Qin, are you alright?" "You are Luan?" Qin Ruo didn't stop his legs, but looked sideways at the old man in front of him. "It's my humble servant. It's better to meet him than to be famous. Mr. Qin is indeed a handsome man among dragons and phoenixes. Seeing him today really deserves his reputation," Luan praised respectfully. "Hee, that old Lu. Look at my current situation. I'm about to be arrested and imprisoned. We won't have a chance to see you again in the future," Qin Ruo said with a smile, saying that he was about to be arrested and imprisoned, but his face there is no such expression as it should be. "Haha, Xiao Zhang was joking with you. How could you go to such a dirty place? Come here, hurry up and uncuff Master Qin's handcuffs," Luan said seriously. The beautiful detective Lin Yenner, with a wide-eyed expression of surprise, took the key and was about to release Qin Ruo's handcuffs. "No." Qin Ruo stood up neatly, opened her hand, and the handcuffs made of pure aluminum alloy broke instantly. At this scene, all the policemen in the audience shuddered, and they all looked at Qin Ruo with fear in their eyes. It turned out that this person was not pretending to be aggressive, but really awesome. "That old Lu, I don't have time to chat with you, so I'm leaving early." Qin Ruo turned to Lin Yenner beside her, and said with a smile, "Goodbye, Mainyo. Master Qin, go slowly." When Luan saw Qin Ruo walking away, he quickly said something, and when he saw that Qin Ruo was gone, his smiling face slowly disappeared, revealing his original serious expression. The interrogation room was silent, and Zhang Taijun was so frightened that he broke out in cold sweat, and even trembled slightly. Luan raised his cold eyes, stared at Zhang Taijun fiercely, and said, Xiao Zhang, did you know how much trouble you caused just now? Zhang Taijun shook his head blankly. This old gentleman, do you know the identity of that person? Lin Yener asked curiously. Luan smiled, and glanced at Lin Yener appreciatively. Then he said to Zhang Taijun in a cold tone, Xiao Zhang, if you take him into prison, then don't mention you, a small prefecture-level city chief, even the people behind you will get off the horse, he is not you at all you can afford to offend. Mr. Lu, just tell me who he is. Zhang Taijun really has too many doubts. How powerful can a young man in his 20s be? Is he the son of a provincial high-ranking official? But it's a bit difficult to bring him down, and besides, he has a very close relationship with some big shots in the province. Zhang Taijun was extremely puzzled at this moment. You don't have the right to know yet. Luan snorted coldly, remember one thing, it's best not to provoke him in the future, otherwise if something happens, no one can protect you. Qin Ruo stretched after leaving the police station, feeling comfortable from the beginning to the end. Enjoying the beautiful scenery of this thriving city along the way, I feel very good. Perhaps everyone leaving the police station feels this way? Half an hour later, Qin Ruo returned to the hotel. The restaurant was empty, except for Xia Feishuan, who was wearing work clothes, dozing off and sitting on the chair at the front desk. Seeing Qin Ruo coming, he ran over excitedly, grabbed his arm and said, Landlord, are you alright? Seeing that she cared so much about him, Qin Ruo was somewhat moved. I haven't been cared so much by a woman for many years, so I made a grimace and said, haha, what can happen to your omnipotent landlord? Humph, arrogant. Xia Feishuan withdrew her hand in embarrassment, and Qin Ruo smiled at her. I don't think it will be open today, let's go back. Then will my salary still be paid? Xia Feishuan stared at him pitifully. Qin Ruo touched his head helplessly. The little money fan in front of him looked like he couldn't live without money. But how did he know that Xia Feishuan was so poor that she was going crazy recently, looking at the 2 pairs of golden cats above her head eagerly every day, the desire for money in her eyes almost betrayed her enthusiasm for everything. But thinking of the consequences, Xia Feishuan gritted her teeth again. The salary will be paid to you as usual, Qin Ruo said speechlessly. Wow, landlord, you are the best, hee hee. Xia Feishuan cheered happily, and went back to the room to change out of her overalls, revealing her original perfect figure. The two walked back to the villa, really like a couple, watching many people on the road staring at them with envious or jealous eyes. Don't mention the comfort in Qin Ruo's heart, everyone's eyes seem to remind him that the beautiful woman beside him is his girlfriend. Landlord, why do I feel that you are a bit embarrassing? Xia Feishuan asked curiously. Is there? Qin Ruo quickly revealed the appearance of a gentleman. Yes, you obviously have. Xia Feishuan retorted. No. Have. The two bickered all the way, and soon returned to the villa. At this time, the setting sun had already turned half of the sky red. Qin Ruo stood on the balcony on the 3rd floor, lit a cigarette and started smoking. Landlord, I'm going to the movies, do you want to go with me? Xia Feishuan's pleasant voice came from below. No, you go, pay attention to your own safety at night, Qin Ruo said. Looking at the back of Xia Feishuan leaving, Qin Ruo suddenly thought of her who had been dusty for a long time, whispered softly, and said with a smile, Sure Yao, she really looks like you. Smoking alone on the balcony, Qin Ruo shook off the strange thoughts in her heart, boiled a pot of water, brewed a cup of tea, and sat leisurely on the chair to read the newspaper. He has advanced his mental age by 30 years, living a comfortable life of an elderly man in his 50s. Maybe because he felt it was too boring, Qin Ruo started a rare set of boxing, which was called Bakwan. This punch is extremely lethal, and contains the essence of all major Chinese boxing arts. The creator absorbed the essence of it, and combined Tai Chi, Bagua, Wing Chun, etc. together. Formed this boxing method called Bakwan. This is what Qin Ruo's master once taught him, saying that besides him in the world today, Qin Ruo is the only one who learns this boxing technique, and how awesome this boxing is. As soon as this set of boxing techniques was used, a powerful momentum was released on the balcony, and the wind rose before anyone moved. Bakwan has 7 moves in total, and now Qin Ruo has practiced the second move to sweep away thousands of troops. As the name suggests, even if facing hundreds of enemies, Qin Ruo can defeat them with just a pair of fleshy palms. The fist wind whizzed like thunder. Qin Ruo's movements seemed slow, but his movements were extremely fast. Half an hour later, Qin Ruo bent down out of breath, and exhaled heavily. It's just that I have used sweeping thousands of armies a few times, and I have no strength. It seems that I haven't fully understood sweeping thousands of armies. After practicing boxing, Qin Ruo sat cross-legged on the ground, inhaled and exhaled according to the method his master once said. As time slowly passed, Qin Ruo gradually entered the state, and her whole body seemed to be covered with a thin layer of mist. From a distance, her figure was very hazy, as if she was in a fog. If a kung fu master from the inner family saw this situation, they would definitely be terrified. The energy in the body penetrated the outside and formed a mist, which is a sign of the peak of energy. Although it is no longer the era of cold weapons and hot weapons occupy a dominant position, the real masters are still martial arts masters. Chinese martial arts has been passed down for 5,000 years, and there are countless practitioners. But most of them have learned a little bit of superficiality and some simple self-defense techniques. There are still too few who can reach the peak of Qi Jin. They are all real masters. Of course, this is relatively speaking. After all, there are still many relatively complete schools in China. Whether it is a famous school full of talents, or a hermit family with a small population, there are still many vigorous masters. There are even beyond vigor, reaching an even more terrifying state of transformation. Qin Ruo didn't know the specific name of his school. The old man didn't say it. He only knew that it was passed down through a single line. The old man had only one apprentice in his life. The moon was bright and the stars were sparse, and it was already early morning. Qin Ruo let out a long breath, feeling refreshed and full of energy. Turning around outside the door a few times, Qin Ruo found that Xia Feishuan hadn't come back yet, so she stretched and planned to go back to her room to sleep. Just when Qin Ruo was about to go down from the balcony, he suddenly heard a messy footsteps in the distance, and the sound of the footsteps was mixed with an astonishing sound of killing, and when it reached Qin Ruo's ears, it disappeared. Weak to barely audible. Binhai is very noisy at night. Qin Ruo muttered, rubbing her eyes. What does it have to do with me? Before the words were finished, there was a sudden knock on the door downstairs. Qin Ruo immediately returned to the balcony and glanced at the door of the villa, but saw a burly black figure standing outside the door. The knock on the door kept ringing. Qin Ruo went downstairs and opened the door. A bloody smell passed by as soon as he arrived, and the burly black shadow staggered past Qin Ruo. Close the door. The rough man who fell through the door turned his head and roared at Qin Ruo, as aggressive as a tiger. However, Qin Ruo calmly looked at the man in front of him. The man had a fierce look on his face, with knife scars and scars scattered all over his cheeks. As scary as it looks, a child will definitely cry out of fear when he sees it. The man looks rough. The mighty body exudes a strong murderous aura, and the upper body is wearing a vest. Several wounds on the body have been cut by sharp knives, revealing a series of hideous, twisted and bloody wounds, which look particularly terrifying under the light. Qin Ruo closed the door, not because he was afraid. The big guy in front of him could be considered a good master, but he didn't pose too much threat to Qin Ruo. The living room was suddenly plunged into darkness, only a pair of tiger-like sharp eyes flashed coldly. With heavy gasps, the atmosphere in the room became oppressive. Not long after, there were chaotic footsteps in the alley outside the villa. There is a bloody smell in the alley. The evil tiger must be running along this alley. Please watch carefully and don't fall into a blind spot. A gloomy voice sounded outside, and Qin Ruo noticed that the man in front of him suddenly became nervous. A resolute stern look flashed in his eyes, and the death will and killing intent emanating from his mighty body became stronger and stronger. The character is a bit like a black bear, hee. The man suddenly turned his head and stared at Qin Ruo. His sharp eyes were as sharp as an eagle's, and the flickering sternness made people feel chills all over his body. At this moment, there was a knocking sound outside the door. The face of the big man suddenly changed, coldness pervaded his face, and his whole body gradually became tense. Qin Ruo opened the door and found a group of men in black standing in front of her. These men were holding sharp daggers. Standing at the front was an old man in gray clothes about 50 years old. The bloody dagger in his hand was still dripping with blood. He gave Qin Ruo a cold look, and said, "Someone has escaped into your house. We have to go in and search for it. There is no rejection in the words, with an amazing aura. Qinrua lazily shook her shoulders and said, the cultivation base of Qi Jin is at the early stage. The old man's face changed drastically, and the ordinary young man in front of him could tell his cultivation level at a glance, and he couldn't help but feel a wave of fear. And the next moment, he clasped his fists and said with a quack air, this senior, I am the elder of the Yellow Gang. I was ordered by the leader to pursue a master. I hope you don't stop him. Qinrua didn't answer, but just glanced at him contemptuously, and said, I don't have anyone you want here, and if you break into a private house, it's illegal. Hearing Qinrua's last words, the old man's expression remained unchanged. They have done too many illegal things. But facing this unfathomable young man in front of him, he knew that he was by no means an opponent. Then disturbed Senior Qingxiu. The old man politely clasped his fists, turned around and said, retreat, you are not here. A group of people immediately disappeared outside Qinrua's villa. Qinrua lazily closed the door, and the rough man behind clasped his fists gratefully and said, I'm a tiger, thank you for saving my life. Evil Tiger looked at this young man who was a few years younger than himself, and his inner surprise could not be expressed in words. He was forced to retreat from the great elder of the Night Dragon Gang with just a few words. He thought he could not catch up with this terrifying strength. Qinrua chuckled, sat lazily on the sofa, lit a cigarette and said, I saved you just because you look like a brother to me, that's all. Thanks. Smoking? Qinrua asked, looking at the vicious tiger whose face was covered with scars and blood still remained in the wound. Evil Tiger nodded, and took a cigarette from Qinrua with trembling hands. The two men smoked for a while, and the atmosphere was somewhat silent. Qinrua didn't ask why this man was hunted down. There are too many reasons for this kind of thing. The evil tiger was silent for a while, and explained the reason himself. I came to Binhai City only for one person. He is Yulong, the boss of Binhai City's dark world, who controls the Night Dragon Gang. I was going to assassinate him tonight, but I didn't expect that the assassination would fail. Injured, and then chased and killed by his subordinates. Qinrua shrugged and smiled, oh, that's interesting. The evil tiger glanced at the wound, grinning in pain, and Qinrua said, I have a house for rent here, 1,000 a day, do you want to rent it? Evil Tiger didn't even think about it, he nodded and said, let it for a month. Qinrua smiled and said, pay the money tomorrow morning, and there are bandages and medicines in the room. The evil tiger clasped his fists showing gratitude, and Qinrua led him to an ordinary room. At this moment, an unusual thing is happening in the Yes group, a super large group in Binhai City. In recent years, he has made a lot of money by developing real estate on the outskirts of cities.